logicality, reasonableness, and fictitiousness. So here's the outline. Reasonableness. I started thinking about this in terms of Williamson's idea about an externalism about knowledge, that you could comply with the knowledge rule of assertion or action without knowing that you've complied with it. So that kind of externalism. Of course, he doesn't talk explicitly about rationality, but I draw a distinction between reasonableness and rationality along that line. So these philosophers are not directly discussed, but I want to acknowledge them because it's them who got me thinking about these issues. And then there's Ludwig Wittgenstein on nonsense from his Tractatus that got me thinking about fictitiousness. Then it's Graham Priest with his works on the impossible and dialecticism and period consistency, of course, when I think about logicality. And then it might sound strange, how does Kripke relates to humanity? But his work on empty names and fiction and pretense, a pretended proposition, that's where that got me to think about that. Along aesthetics, it's you will see what how they relate to the big picture. So let me start with the first section, reasonableness. So here's one conversation, and it focuses on history instead of mathematics. So Dolores say, well, that's Ray over there. My name is Ray, of course. You know that. I used to be quite thin. And Rachel, oh, he's so thin. And then 14 years later, now I grew bigger. And Dolores introduced me again, but under another name. This is Wylock. Have you met him? And Rachel said, oh, he's fat. I don't recall any friends with this body shape. So you see that Rachel has the belief about me. In one, Ray is thin, and then another instance is Wylock is fat. So I would suppose that that's a case that we think the conversation that's been going on, the participant of the conversation are reasonable. They are being reasonable. This conversation is just reasonable people doing reasonable things, I think. So that's one case, and that's another case of mathematics, maybe much more controversial. So Dolores said a lot of things about prime number. A prime has no factor, it's a one in itself, but one is not a prime. Factors are integer divisors. If a number, I got, let me see. Sorry. Okay, my screen, I can't see these things. Maybe you have to read it. So roughly, he's trying to illustrate what prime numbers are. And then Rachel thinks, okay, so 2 is an even prime, 3 is an odd prime, so it's 5. Then any prime larger than 2 has a factor. Any larger even number has 2 as a prime, as a factor. So all larger primes are not even. So if an integer is not even, it is odd. So the largest prime is odd. So it sounds, it's a reasonable conversation, I think. But well, those of us who know that, well, given the proof by Euclid, that's not true, right? Because, well, there's something problematic about thinking that, but I think it's another case in which the participant of the conversation have been reasonable. So, okay. And there's some comment on what happened. So on metaphysics, a priority, because these two cases seem to differ in terms of a posteriority and a priority. And so Ray is thin and Wylock is fat. It is metaphysically impossible that a person is both thin and fat because, well, first, Ray is identical with Wylock. That's just my two names. And thinness entails no fatness and fatness entails no thinness. So you can't have both. So it's metaphysically impossible. Although the people who believed, Rachel believes that Ray is thin and Wylock is fat, there are no possible worlds in which Rachel's beliefs are all true. So in terms of a possible world that's a more robust, a realist conception of possible world in which you can't have Ray and Wylock is the same person. So on that conception of possible worlds, there's no possible world in which Ray and Wylock does not conserve properties, something like that. So the indiscernibilities of identical. So So that's one case in which reasonable people might encounter problems. And then there's a priority in terms of mathematics and logic, because, well, maybe I shouldn't go through this proof of about Euclid's proof. It goes something like okay, so the product R of, okay, let me see. No, this is too much. Maybe I'll just state the fact that given what they've said, the things they said about primes, if you add them together, it will given some definition or description of what divisions are. In the end, if you can get that kind of that description, in the end you have a contradictory description. So that's how the presupposition that there's the largest prime has problem. So in the end, even though that's reasonable, but in all, it's not good, or as I would want to say, it's irrational. And this is a short comment that I think that got me thinking from Williamson's externalism, because there could be reasonable doubt, as in a court of law, we talk about reasonable doubt. And sometimes evidence seems to defeat prior knowledge. But even if we knew certain thing, maybe when we go out, we have cheese in our pocket, we know that we got that, we just put it in a pocket. But sometimes we just doubt that maybe it's not there. That doubt might be reasonable, but give on a certain externalism, that doubt is actually irrational, because you knew, your evidence indicate that you knew that, but sometimes something deceives you into thinking that it might not be there. So you might have reasonable doubt that turn out to be irrational. And that's maybe a use of the word reasonableness in contrast to rationality. And of course, there are unreasonable doubt, and what suffices for unreasonable doubt or unreasonableness is when you know that you ought not have doubted, or maybe when you know that it's irrational to do that. If you know that, although rationality is external, but there are times at which you know something to be irrational and you still do that, that's a blatant unreasonableness. And the conversation that's gone on just then, the two conversations, the participants, they do not know that they are being irrational, given that it's irrational to believe Ray to be thin and Ylock is fat, and also irrational to believe that they are largest prime. Even if it's irrational, they are reasonable. So that's what I want to say. And this is some comment about, because this will be relevant later on, because when we talk about the largest prime is odd, well, given what we believe, no real object is referred to. So the subject term doesn't predicate on any real object. And if there's a constant domain of reality, that's the Williamsonian ontological necessitarianism, everything. So constant. Well, the point about necessary existence. So there are no world in which the largest prime has referent or exists, and some other world doesn't. So in all worlds, it doesn't have any reference. And then there's the variable domain of fantasy. And I noted this because I will talk about that later on. If there are worlds in which the domain is not as it is in reality, then there's something that we can make sense of the conversation. It's just like that they might not be talking about reality when they talk about the largest prime being odd. They might not know that they're not talking about reality, but it's reasonable to be that confused. So, and another comment about, because I've talked about reasonableness, and even though sometimes it seems reasonable to doubt certain things, but we need that kind of reasonable doubt, because when we have reasonable yet irrational to believe that the largest prime is odd, it's through perfection of rationality, through reasonable inquiry, that we sometimes suppose certain thing and doubt certain thing, that we come to know better, to perfect our rationality through this kind of reasonable inquiry. And we sometimes take epistemic risk, and we have to not maximize our knowledge. We have to take some risk and make some reasonable bet, make hypotheses and test them, And yeah, we don't ask any question. If we don't raise any doubt, guided by reasonableness, we will never stumble on falsity nor nonsensicality, but we just don't get anywhere. So reasonableness, even if it sometimes runs into irrationality, it's a good thing. That's what I think is important. It's because even though I've said something bad about reasonableness, it's still not that bad. And because on the note of the largest prime, I brought in something, the fictitious. And this is another thing that I want to discuss at the background about intentionality and semantics, because it relates to my view about logic and the world and metaphysics. So there are belief and fact, and belief has content, and on a possible world semantics, content is just set of possible worlds. So a belief is true if and only if the set, that is the belief content, includes the actual world. But these the belief and the content of belief and the fact, these things, the belief and the fact somewhat relates through semantics, but then there are false beliefs, and this raises interesting issues. And one projection of possibilities, and another philosophy doesn't talk much that way, but if we think in terms of projection of possibilities, beliefs, when we think about things, when we think things with concept, if we think about it as projection of possibilities, we thought the world would be that way, we project the world with certain possibilities, and there's a question of whether our projection is fulfilled with actuality or by the actual world. So with that, I can distinguish what is a real projection with real objects. That's Kripke, because Kripke talks about whether, when we talk about whether Moses is real, the book of Exodus, is that a real story about someone fictitious, or is that a fictitious story about someone fictitious? It depends on whether you're projecting some worlds with real objects or not. If Moses is an actual person, then you're a real projection with real objects. If Moses is just someone that's not real, then it's a real projection because you're talking about the sea, you're talking about people, you're talking slaves, talking about Egyptian. These are, you're projecting something. These projections are real, but you're projecting with fictitious objects. And this might sound a little bit like continental philosophy, but I think there's something that we can learn from when we talk about intentionality. So that's belief and fact and the world. That comes down to this, logic and metaphysics. So you will see the Wittgensteinian flavor afterwards as it goes on. Logic and metaphysics. So fact constitute a world, and impossibility of a world is when some facts in the world are incompatible. So we might think like Ray is thin and Whitelock is fat, but these two facts are actually incompatible, and that makes the world that I think I'm in an impossible world. And logic and metaphysics relate in the following way. In this may be a limit case when the world is an impossible world, because when you think clearly about an impossible world, when I realize that Ray is just Whitelock, when I know more fact, when I describe it in more detail, and given the law of indiscernibility of identicals, I will logically deduce a contradiction. So impossible worlds, in the end, if I think clearly enough with sufficient information, I will find out that the descriptions entail contradictions. So possibilities, worlds, that's objects, and then logic, descriptions about the object and operation on the description. It will, if it's an impossible world, we will find a contradiction. So these are how these two things relate in my epistemology, maybe deduction. So impossibility known if contradiction detected. So that's how contradiction and impossibility and even belief and fact, that's how these things relate. That's at least how I think about the issue. And well, we do things in the world, we reason about the world, and let me see. Yeah, so what we do, it has to do with possibility, impossibility, and what we think, we think with in logic and in terms of finding contradiction. So that's another analogy. And this is this goes into something even more away from the literature, because the world, I use the word real. Metaphysical possibilities are real, a reality, and the metaphysics of reality. So I use that predicate real to talk about possibilities, that metaphysical possibilities, because I want to talk about metaphysical impossibilities. What are they? They're just possibilities that do not belong to reality, and because only reality's possibilities are metaphysical possibilities, so possibilities do not belong to reality. They are not metaphysical possibilities. They are metaphysical impossibilities. And metaphysical impossibilities, if it is possibilities at all, because I want to quantify over them as objects, so I would just call them fictitious possibilities. And so for anything, if it is not real, it is fictitious. And then to go back to the point about semantics, there are real projection versus fictitious projection. There could also be fictitious projection with fictitious objects. And this would get very complicated. That I got to, so it's like if most Sherlock Holmes is a fictitious object, but if we think about him to project some world that's maybe project some impossible, when we talk about him living on Baker Street, well, Baker Street is a real place, and even street is a real object. Street are real things. But if we project something like Sherlock Holmes resides in a squared circle home, then we are projecting him using some fictitious things. Then it complicates the issue. So that's the way I would use this notion, because I want to bring out this Wittgensteinian flavor here. Constitution and mereology. I think constitution and set membership relates in the following way. Well, a world is constituted by the fact, and the world is identical with a set of facts. And let me see. So I'm just trying to propose that the relation between part-whole relation and set membership and let me see. Identity is an object that's constituted by the properties. It's when we're going to talk about only one world, the identity is constituted by spatial temporal. I'm merely stating this as what I think, because I want to go on with these few things. So individuality is constituted by identity. It's like what makes a person who it is, such as being actually here and now, constitutes my identity. Of course, when people talk about identity, we talk about something modal, but individuality and essence, I want to distinguish that. And and to use this notion, I can talk about a kind of fiction, that because it's a counterfactual property of me that I'm right now in Beijing. It's a possible scenario, but actually I'm not in Beijing. So it's an actual fiction that I'm in Beijing. I just lay out my project here. I'm doing that without argument. I apologize for that, but I'm laying these things out. It will sound strange that identity is something that's restricted to the actual world, but space and time, because given that there are no co-location, space and time in the actual world actually constituted object's identity. And if we bring in modality, then we would discuss what's essence, and essence constitutes kind. Essence of number is constituted by the necessary abstractness, but even if necessary abstractness is an constitute the numbers as a kind, but not all necessary abstract objects are numbers. And there are also, just as the counterfactual property of me right now, they're also impossible property. For example, it's a real fiction that the number one instantiated the property of evenness. One is odd, it doesn't instantiate evenness, it's not even. but it's a fictitious or fictional property that could, on an impossible metaphysics, it could have had that property. So all right, and okay, yeah, the world is kind of all that is the case. So instead of saying the world is all that is the case, I think that the world is constituted by all that is the case, constituted by all fact, and given a meteorological relation, a particle constitution relation using as membership formalism. It's just that the world is a set that includes all fact, and the facts are also that I am speaking here and someone else speaking somewhere else, even if you don't care about the speaker, it's two different facts. Facts are indexed by spatial temporally. Spatial temporal are also a property of fact. So an even one does not belong to reality because a one is not even, it's odd, so it's impossible that it's even. Ray in Beijing right now does not belong to actuality. Because the world, the possible world, the actual world is a set that includes this fact. So this fact does not belong to actuality. And another corollary is that the world is constituted by its being the way it is, because that's the way it's constituted by all that is the case. And the world is the way it is also the case. It's also a fact. So the world is constituted by its being the way it is. So what I want to say is that a Wittgensteinian way, the atomism that I want to try to get at on some external extensionality of from Quine, I could use predicate logic to talk about the structure of the world that Wittgenstein want to talk about in Tractatus. That's what I want to get at with all these very that having gestured at these things at a tangential level. And why do I talk about that? Because I want to bring in logicality, and it might sound strange because modal logic and now I'm talking about a logic of logic to modal logic from Kripke. He calls it relative possibility, but maybe accessibility from between worlds, because he talks about a world relative, a possible relative to some other world. So I propose a relation called logical accessibility, and it reads like this: for any x, y, and z, y is logically accessible from x with z, if and only if z is true of x, only if z is true of y. So it's like what z is true of x, only if z is true of y. Let me see. Oh, maybe I would. Well, so that is a linguistic object, or maybe a sentence. It could be a predicate, actually. But so let me illustrate that with an example. So world one, a world in which I am a native Cantonese speaker and not bespectacled. World two is a world in which I'm a native Cantonese speaker and bespectacled. So so the sentence, Ray is a native Cantonese speaker, is that instantiates this sentence. So that is true of x only if that is true of y. So W2 is logically accessible from W1, right? Because let me see. Well, it's true only if the sentence is true of one, only if it's true of another. And since in both worlds it's true of both worlds, so it's accessible both ways. On the other hand, if Ray is bespectacled, it's true of world two, but not true of world one. So W2 is accessible from W1 because, yeah, it's false of world one. So it's because I'm saying that it's true of world one only if true of world two. So it's W2 is accessible from W1, but on the other hand, because the sentence is true of world two, but not true of world one, it's a false of world one, so it's not logically accessible. W1 is not logically accessible from W2. I hope this is clear. Okay, so yeah, And with this notion of logical accessibility, I want to talk about a measure called logicality. But first, I have to say what's the perfection of logicality. So before that, I have to say what's a logical state. A logical state is constituted by a set of sentences, and you can think a set of beliefs, because I'm not distinguishing this too clearly enough. It's just maybe sentences in the head. It's just a set of beliefs, set of sentences. You can suppose that they're the same thing at the moment. So logicality measures inferentiality in a way that logical omniscience measures the most. It's perfection. It outputs one. So it's just when you maximize the inferentiality. So whatever belief you have, you tease out all logical consequences. So I assign that to measure logical omniscience against the perfection of logicality. That's one. And then if so that's when all logical consequences are inferred. And for example, this the L that's I'm using that's the logicality L. Maybe I should use another font. So the set of beliefs or sentences A, and B has the larger logicality measure than L, A, and B, because the set on left it make one more inference, right? It make the conjunction A and B, so it measures higher logicality. So this is actually the meat of the presentation. And so this is something that I want to go over very quickly. Again, I want to do everything with practical logic. That's a very ambitious project, I know, but I want to talk about measurement, because measurement it's also a ranking in measure theory. If I can work out the relation of addition, maybe something a little bit like what Frege did, is just the addition. I take that as constitution. So the sum of 1 and 1 is 2. If only 1 constitutes 2 with 1, and this would allow me to say that 2 includes 1 because 2 metaphysically entails with numericality 1. So I've been trying to work out a measurement relation, a measure a function that's a ranking among things, but you rank things with different things. So let's say the set of men metaphysically entails the set of women with the American presidency up to 2021. So how something entails another thing with a certain thing, because I've been using accessibility not only as a two-place predicate, but also with regard to certain things. So again, this is something for future work. So I just want to share that with you. And the metaphysical accessibility also, I need this in order to avoid using a lot of math. So y is metaphysically accessible from x with z, even only if x is larger than or equal to y with z. And the funny thing is that in infinity, metaphysically entails all numbers with numericality, and this will be important afterwards. So it's just infinity and the ranking relation. I refer to infinity and I use the ranking and I talked about all numbers, right? I don't have to name 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I just refer to all numbers that's been entailed by infinity. Then I refer to all numbers without giving any name to any numbers. And this will be important if, well, I want to measure things without using too much math. And these are the problem I will run into when I talk about logicality. So this is one case. Case 1, vacuity, set of no sentence, set of one non-contradictory sentence. So the set is, so there's a set, suppose A is an atomic sentence without any logical constant in it. So it's just an atomic sentence. So there are two sets. One contains no sentence at all, and one contains just one sentence, A. And so here, well, maybe you would have different judgment. I would judge that the set with only one sentence without any inference as having a larger logicality measure. So that's one case. Another case is inconsistency. So because then this is when it begins to run into trouble, because the set P, A and A implies not A, it's inconsistent. We can see right in front of us, but it didn't. But it differs from the next set of sentences, which has made the inference. And I think that P has a larger logicality measure than LQ, but it's because LQ is a larger negative number. So when it's inconsistent, the set of sentences are inconsistent, the logicality will begin to measure negative. So that's something I will have to establish or argue for. So the more inferences you made in the negative realm, when you're in the set of inconsistent beliefs, even when you haven't found out that the set entails contradictions, it's negative, and the more inferences you made, it's more negative and more negative. So before you make those inferences, you measure less negative, and that's how it's a larger number. So P is larger than LQ. And then there's a case of contradiction. Q and R, so that's Q just then, and then I made a conjunction, A and not A. So I made one more inference. It's actually a logically valid inference, ignoring vacuity. So LQ is larger than LR because R is a larger negative. And then there's explosion. That's famous for when we're in the realm of contradiction or inconsistency, logical inconsistency. So R is just the R we just had, and then we use disjunctive syllogism to make one more inference and add the B. I think people are familiar with how explosion happens, and T is to add one more thing per explosion, and U is to add another thing from S, which is not B, instead of just C. And of course, they're atomic sentences, so C and B, they're not, they don't have any explicit logical relation. And V would be to conjoin the B and not B from U. So, and these are the ranking that I would assign. So LR, R has a larger logicality measure because S measures more negative because it made one more inference in the realm of being consistent. And then T would be when we add one more, add one more sentence. But T and U, they are the same logicality measure because it's just the same inferences that they've made, although U is so to speak, more contradiction. And LU and LV, we made even one more inference, which is to conjoin B and not B. And that's when the V has the largest negative number. So that's when the logicality measure, that's how I would measure them, measure their logicality when explosions happen. And validity, logicality increases. Okay, hold on. Now I can't see. I apologize. Okay. Logicality increase betters logical state. So yeah, we can see that if in the realm of the positive, when it's not an inconsistent set, logicality increase betters logical state. This logical state gets better and better. Of course, there's a question of what kind of betterness is that, what values we're talking about. So case one transition constitutes a vacuously logically valid inference because when we transition from the lower logicality to the higher one, it's actually vacuously valid because we're inferring from a premise that can be false. So it's a logically valid inference because it's impossible that premises are false and the conclusion is true, because the premise cannot be false because there's no premise. So case one, that's the vacuity case. Better inferentiality decreases logicality of inconsistent sets. So when the set is inconsistent, when we make more inferences, it actually decreases the logicality, and that's what's counterintuitive, and that's what, if I were to use my logicality measure, this is a question that I will run into in the realm of the inconsistent. So case two and case three, they are logically valid inference on paraconsistency. That's why I think about the issue while thinking about Graham Priest's work. And case four, transition constant logically valid inference with disjunctive syllogism among that. So case four is case two and three. It's fine on paraconsistency. Case four, we use disjunctive syllogism, then we will have explosions. Okay. And okay, so and that's my comment on logic and epistemology, because knowledge entails truth, and logic operates on truth, and epistemology on knowledge. And the betterness that we're talking about, I think it relates to knowledge in a certain way, because when we make more inference, we know more about maybe the world, or maybe we know more about our set of beliefs, our logical relations. So in any case, it's an increase in knowledge. So increase in knowledge. So logicality, it has to do with truth. So increase in logicality is necessary, but not sufficient for better knowledge, because when you make an inference from an empty empty set of premises, it doesn't increase knowledge. It just adds more sentences that's vacuously logically valid. So there's an epistemic conception of validity, because epistemic validity obligates belief, where if something is, or epistemic, in a way the logical validity does not. So that's the kind of betterness is an epistemic one, epistemic value. I need that because this is the last session. Thank you for bearing with me up to this point. And this is all getting maybe even more Graham Priest than Graham Priest now, because I'm talking about negativity as a fictitious positivity, because you see that when we increase in illogicality with increased inferentiality and sense from a logically inconsistent set, the more inferences I make, which is logically valid, it seems to be a good thing. But I'm actually increasing illogicality. And the more inferences I make, it's getting worse and worse and worse. So, but how is that a positivity when we make inferences? So I want to say that it's a fictitious positivity. And so, but I have to highlight that not everything has a logicality measure. Intentional state, it has logicality measure, a set of no sentence that could have included some measure 0. So yeah, of course, I will have to clarify what it is for a set that could have included some sentences, because a set, we seldom think about that as an object that has the metaphysics, that has a kind of modality that it could have something. But if we think about like a belief content as a set, that set could have had some sentences. I know this is counterintuitive to a hardcore logician, because a set is just a set. What does that even mean to say that it could have been something? But if a set could have had included some sentences, but it in fact included none, then it measures 0. It's vacuous. And one has a number one, it has no logical dimension, because it's not a set that could have included anything. It's a number, it's a numerical object. So it distinguishes the structure and the logic of a theory of numbers. So, okay. Context. And then in Kripke's work on the fictional name, he mentioned something like a fictional context when he talks about playing with a toy duck, but it's inspired by this, but it's not exactly what he meant here. So domain restriction with embedded sentences. So Rachel knows that Ray was thin, and Ray was thin has its epistemic content within Rachel's epistemic context. So Rachel knows this qualifier restricted the context within Rachel's epistemic context. So it does not include worlds in which Ray is black, because whatever she knows, it's incompatible with her knowledge that I am black. So when she thinks that I was thin, it doesn't include the world in which Ray was thin and black, because it's restricted within her knowledge epistemic context. And there's also domain expansion. When we talk about fictitious context, when we say in Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's novel, Sherlock Holmes lives on Baker Street, because if you use a Stolnaker or a Kripke, of course, version of possible worlds, these worlds are, well, maybe Stolnaker, these worlds are, well, because Sherlock Holmes is not real, so it's not a possible, well, a fictional object. If a possible world doesn't include fictional objects, then we have to expand a context to include worlds that are not possible worlds, but fictitious worlds. We bring in fictitious objects, such as impossible worlds to which Sherlock Holmes belongs. And projection, I'll talk about projection just then. It's like, so I want to go back to the original conversation that we talked about, projecting a largest prime. We pretend that the largest prime exists, and then we make inferences from known premises that it is odd, because, well, because if it's a prime that's larger than 2, it can't be even, so it's got to be odd. So there's the relation between the fictitious context and paraconsistency, because when we bring in impossible worlds, we don't always bring in all impossible worlds. There are impossible worlds that are not relevant, because it makes no epistemic difference, and when we make inferences, we don't, because the addition, hold on, yeah, addition, we can, it seems that we can always add another sentence that's not from the premises, but in the realm of fantasy, when we are talking about impossible worlds, we don't just assume everything, because when we in a unrestricted context, unrestricted domain, we include everything, but impossible worlds are not included in everything. We have to bring in impossibilities. We have to project impossibilities in a way that we don't just explode. We have to bring in things, and that's something that will patch up the problem with the kind of paraconsistency that I want to have while keeping disjunctive syllogism. Okay, so that's classicality without discrimination. And this is another thing that's maybe a little strange, because it is not that for all objects, if it is not even, then it is odd for any, not even, then it is. Okay, so because the relation between negation and negativity, there are some objects that are not even without being odd. It's only numbers, or it's only integers. That's, if it's not even, then it's odd. So there are things that don't have that doesn't have the dimension, like the number 1. It doesn't have a logical dimension, but a belief has a logical dimension. It has logicality measure. So without the dimension, there are no corresponding polarity. So negation differs from negativity in a way that if we bring in a largest prime, a prime at the end, an integer, if it's not even, it's odd. So if it's odd and it's not odd, the negation, how is that? How does negation works as a negativity? That would be an epistemic version of negativity. And when I would write this, I was thinking about how negativity and negation relates together, because negation, it's all or nothing. It's either true or false things, and then how is that relates to the degree that I've been talking about, I want to distinguish negation from the negativity measure of logicality, because it's just an epistemic version of negativity. Okay. So let me see. Yeah, maybe I'll go through this as well. That's another thing about, because I got to think about this because of the largest prime problem. So infinity is real. So I can refer to infinity and then refer to all numbers with the larger than or equal to predicate. So the semantic reference of infinity, I can do that without a complete description of infinity. I can just refer to infinity without completely describing that. And the semantic reference of Hong Kong has good weather today on 2021, March 22nd, includes the possible worlds in which Joe Biden has an odd number of hair on his head, because that's what a realist metaphysics of possible worlds work. We just say a sentence and then we refer to all real possible worlds, and whatever that world, irrelevant features of that world, it's also referred to. But negative infinity is not real, because it's on the other dimension. If my point about negativity holds, it's a fictitious positivity. So we just project, and we can't project infinity because we are not infinite. We just like we can refer to infinity because it's out there, it's real, but we can't. There's no negative infinity. A mind that continuously projects from -1 with -1 constructs a fictitious number with an ever increasing negativity without reaching negative infinity. So that's a consequence of my view. And yeah, so when I talk about the logicality measure, and there's a point about what it is that's a better logicality measure. Why is a larger logicality measure a better one? If one informal sense we might have is it has to do with epistemic value, but of course logicality by itself is not epistemic. That's already a very controversial point. So a better logical competence will have better logical performance through better inference, because given known premises, the better logical competences will help us to perform logically better, to make better inferences, and a fictitiously better epistemic performance through pretending some impossible worlds as real. So this is how I'm trying to tackle the problem of making inferences in a paraconsistent realm when we have set of inconsistent beliefs. What it seems that we're doing better and better and better, but that betterness is actually a fictitious betterness. And then we bring in pretense, and that's why I think it relates to tangentially to Kripke's work. So on supposition that non-normal models that satisfy all beliefs in an inconsistent set are normal, so we pretend that it's normal, and that's how our knowledge operation on those set of beliefs seem to be doing some work. We seem to do better and better, but in fact it's not. So better fictitious epistemic performance worsens real logicality, because the more inferences we make, we're actually getting more. We reveal the contradictoriness of our beliefs more and more when we're in an inconsistent realm. So to explain what we're doing when in a paraconsistent logic, well, because human intellectual activity are constituted by the intrinsic pursuit of knowledge. We pursue knowledge for its own sake, and our intellectual activity constituted by our act of knowing, and a perfect compliance of an aesthetic rule of pretense is through beauty maximization. That's also a very big assumption, because when we pretend, the best pretense is when we maximize beauty. And I talk about when in the realm of fantasy or inconsistent or beliefs or paraconsistent inferences, we're just pretending. So what makes our pretense a better one? It's not epistemic, because we don't come to know more things. So what are we doing? So we're pretending better when we make more inferences in that realm. So beauty measures with humanity because the intrinsic pursuit of knowledge, it's a human activity. And how is it that we seem to know more, we pretend to know more in the realm of the inconsistent? Why do we seem to do better? Why is it a better pretense? Because it constitutes humanity when we know more. So we pretend better through pretending to know more. So in terms of an aesthetic that measures with humanity. So a fictitious epistemic betterment, betters real humanity through real pretense and pretending without knowing that. There are cases in which we are pretending without knowing that we are pretending. It's like when we make inferences, we don't know that we're having inconsistent beliefs. That's the whole point, right? If we knew that, we will drop some of them. But sometimes when we are making, when paraconsistent logic operates on some set of beliefs, it's almost always that the one that's making inferences, they don't know that they are pretending to know because they don't really know. Okay, so yeah, I apologize for going over this very quickly, and I meant this to be a work in progress. I hope that I hope that I've roughly made clear what I hope my project is. So, and I also hope that you see that that there's something from Timothy Williamson at work about the kind of externalism that you could have complied with some rule without knowing that you do, and the fictitiousness that built on Ludwig Wittgenstein, the atomism, and of course his work. At last he talks about nonsense in his Tractatus, and that's well, nonsense. He doesn't talk about that in terms of fictitiousness, but that's already a theory. And logicality, it also relates to Graham Priest, and it's a measure that I hope that will be useful in the end. And the problem that I encounter because well, you make more inferences, you increase logicality. What about in the realm of the inconsistent belief? And to tackle that problem, I have to talk about pretense and the realm of the inconsistent. We don't really know, but we pretend to know. And why is that a better thing to pretend to know? Because it's human to get to know, and we pretend along the line that human will do. So we pretend better because knowledge is better, even if in the fictitious context we're pretending to know without really knowing. And there are many things we can do when we pretend, and pretending something that human would have done in actuality, that's on an aesthetic of humanity. That's how I would have explained the seeming betterment in making inferences on inconsistent beliefs. All right.